Okay. Hello, and welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics riff out on step 3 and step 11, as prescribed by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, who encouraged us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. And we speak to people with all manner of higher powers, from those who are atheists, sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, Paganists, non-duality, steel ritual steel. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who might just have a different spiritual outlook than us. It's all about live and let live. And please remember that this is not an AA meeting or an NA meeting. It's just a Q&A with about some people's version of the truth, whatever that might be. And sometimes we talk to seekers, to gurus and people's not necessarily in recovery, but today we are. And today we're going to speak to Steve Ford. How are you, Steve?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good to see you, mate. Now, I've just got a bit of a short bio. He sent me over a very short bio, and it goes like this. Steve has been sober 25 years and works as a therapist. After 3.5 years of working the 12-step program, he had a complete awakening. Since then, Steve gives talks on the non-dual nature of consciousness and reality. He also explores the deeper meaning and understanding of continual 12-step work. And he is the author of the best-selling book, Walking Awake. So that's a nice, short but sweet intro there, Steve. So first of all, mate, just want to kick off. Just tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today in the lead up. How did you get sober? And what was your spiritual outlook before you got sober?
That's a good question. I don't actually. The family I grew up in, we didn't go to church or anything, but I did attend a Christian school, and as a young child, I came to really like Christ, if you can say that. We observed the Christian festivals, and I particularly, funny enough, the Jesus of Nazareth film that was shown on TV, if anyone remembers it, Jesus of Nazareth with Robert Powell, I think it was.
That's right.
It was such a great work of art that it really allowed me to understand Christianity even more deeply. So I always had a sense of Christ in my life as a child. I'm not saying I'm a Christian now, but I had that. I could resonate with something deeply true in the teachings of Christ. At 18 years old, I learned that my father was in fact not my biological father, which kind of pulled the rug out from under my feet in regards to my identity. At the age of 18, I remember wanting to be like him so much, following in the footsteps of this role model, to suddenly realizing that I couldn't be like him anymore, and it kind of showed me also that I was never like him anyway. So that was a shocker, and it was after that I kind of began drinking, I would say, more alcoholically. I'd always struggled before the age of 18. I mean, I started drinking at the age of 13. It wasn't every day, but it was with friends where we would get together some evenings, buy a few cans of beer, and sit under a bridge or someone's house if parents were out. And we experimented with alcohol, but when I began drinking regularly, it was at 18 when I found out my father wasn't my real father, that something just opened up inside of me, and I just drank on that. And I don't blame that for my alcoholism, certainly, no way, but it certainly speeded things up. You know, it speeded up the alcoholism, basically. I went into another stage of alcoholism where immediately I began to drink into blackout. That's what I remember. So right from the age of 18, really, I was drinking alcoholically. At that time, I was working with my uncle. We ended up buying the business, and I became a partner in business. But by 1990, I was 22 in 1990. By that time, I was suffering from panic attacks. I don't know. I mean, it's very common for alcoholics to suffer from panic attacks. And I think that's where then I realized that when you drank alcohol, it would take away the panic attack. So I then, at that age of about 21, 22, I began to drink, not only to get drunk and to get out of it, but also to function, you know. So so that began, and subsequently, as a consequence of that kind of chaotic lifestyle, you know, going to work and having to drink and whatever, I lost my place in the business in 1990 at the age of 22. So I lost work. So it was quick, really. You know, I began drinking at 18 alcoholically, and then by 22 I'd lost my work, and then it was another 5 years of trying to sort my life out, but not realizing it was in fact the drink that was totally getting in the way. I was trying to manage this anxiety, this depression, or whatever it was, and drink seemed to be the only way that I cope. And of course, I suffered from terrible self-obsession, you know, as well, you know, that inadequacy, you know. So I tried to study art. I tried to do something else, but drink always got in the way. Then my life got more chaotic. Drinking became more binging. And then by, you know, very, very similar to some people, I began getting arrested for drunk disorderly, until in the end, I ended up living. A friend allowed me to come and stay at his place. I was in a terrible mess. I wasn't really working. And he said, if you come here, you can maybe sort out your drinking, maybe attend an AA meeting. And so I took him up on that. And when I moved in, I was grateful that I had somewhere to stay. But then he started to say, look, you really need to phone AA. And I kind of put it off. And then one day the phone was placed in front of me and I was forced to ring AA, really. And so I phoned AA, and this wonderful chap in Reading called Jim was on the other line. He just began talking. And that's when I got my first identification with an alcoholic. And it just seemed that this guy knew the sort of antics, had the same antics, had the same sort of disease. And he met me at my first meeting that evening. And I kind of knew at my first meeting that as soon as I saw other people talking about the same kind of dilemma, the drink and the you know, all the failures that come with it, self-obsession, I came out of my first meeting with the first gift being that I knew I was an alcoholic. you know. But I was then it was for me to learn what that meant, you know, as we learned that in step one. And I didn't get that in the first few months, because in the first few months I was in and out of AA, and trying to stop drinking, basically trying to stop drinking, trying to stay stopped, and I'd go to meetings. And then I'd been sober for about 6 weeks, and I thought, this is it, you know, 6 weeks sober to an alcoholic is proof that you've overcome the obsession to drink. And you know, there was no craving, the obsession had gone. And so it was somebody's birthday, and I joined a group of people. You know, we went to a nightclub, and I thought, as long as I don't drink, I'll be okay. But strangely enough, I ended up drinking again. You know, I saw a sign that said, buy one beer and get one free. And the next thing you know, I had 2 bottles of beer, and I was throwing it down my face. And I went into blackout. And I remember that evening in snippets, you know, that blackout snippet memory, you know, it's black and then a snippet and a black.
Yes.
I just remember the horrified looks on people's faces as I was trying to dance. But the following morning, I came to, I don't remember falling asleep, but I came to fully clothed. And I remember it was a voice inside my head, an actual voice inside my head said, go to a meeting or have a drink. And usually there's no choice in the matter, because when there's alcohol in the system, the compulsion's still there, and you'll do anything to get rid of that awful hangover and delirium tremens or whatever that is. Mm. And I knew intuitively that I needed to get to a meeting, and I got to the meeting. And I remember walking into the room feeling very, very embarrassed, but feeling I'd let everyone down, and knowing that I was going to have to explain that I've just relapsed, having been sober for 6 weeks. And I was so embarrassed, really. And I walked into the room, and there was my friend on tea duty, pouring the tea. And I knew he was going to ask how I was, and he did. He said, "How are you?" I said, and it was awful. With my head down, I looked up and I just said, "Look, you know, I've had a drink." And he said to me, "Yeah, that's what we do." And that's when I understood step one. And that's when I understood that I couldn't stop drinking. Up until then, I've been trying to stop. Even in AA, I was trying to stay sober. And then suddenly this guy said, "Yeah, that's what we do." And in that moment, I realized I couldn't stop drinking. And that's when I stopped drinking. That was the last time I had a drink. So it's interesting.
Wow, thanks very much for that. A nice a brief journey through the history there. What really gets me is what I'm really interested in. I guess that's why we're here. Is like it intrigues me that after 3.5 years you had a complete awakening. So give us a bit of a run up to it. How this happened, and I'm dying to know. Does that mean that you're enlightened? Is that are we talking that word enlightened? Are we?
Well, self-realized. Enlightenment comes after. Enlightenment is integration from that standpoint of self-realization is what I came to learn, you see. So
in self-realization and then enlightenment. So that's how that works.
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us how, because I'm intrigued with that, what was the build up to self-realization, and then what happened, and then how do you get enlightened?
Sure. No, I'll explain. No, I'll explain, because there are 2 types of awakening in the big book. I think in the beginning, in 1939, when the book was first published, it was very much based on a vital spiritual experience, wasn't it? You know, it was.
Sure.
You know, and then by 1954, in the second edition, it then was more to do with awakening. Well, as the bar was lowered to, because there's a much wider cross section of people. Then there was more the educational variety, or the yeah, more the awakening, where where it was seen as something to shift, a personality shift or something, or I can't remember what they say.
A psychic change.
That's it, a psychic change. You see,
Right.
and I didn't know this. I didn't know this. I mean, when I first got into AA, I for the first 3.5 years of working the steps, I worked them in a way that I later came to understand was person-centered. If that makes sense. There was a subject-object relationship between the sense self of me, the I, with the object thought to work a program, and I became very good at that. And in doing that, there was a shift, a psychic change. There was definitely was what I would call a huge improvement, and my life became a lot more manageable. I was working a program, and I thought that was it. I thought I'd arrived. I thought, this is great. I've got a program. I'm working the steps. I know how to apply the steps to my unmanageability. And at that time, my unmanageability consisted of bodily sensations we call feelings or instinct, and a mental or emotional response to that pattern of will, self-will. And I knew that self-will over instinct has to be managed, as it states in the big book or in the steps. And certainly in the 12 by 12, it really expands on that. So I was doing quite fine. I was doing very well. And it did. It took about 2.5, 3 years before I could safely feel okay. And so by that time, I'm extending myself now to college, to because as I've told you about my background, I lost my business in 1990, so it's 5 years before. I'd never really amounted much since then. So I thought, well, there's nothing to go back to. Now I've got 2.5, 3 years of recovery. I need to start extending into what I need to be doing in society, in my life. And so I thought I'll go back to college to basically do my A levels. So I began doing college, and it proved very successful. I was doing very well. I was doing an access course, which consisted of about, I think it's the equivalent of about 3 A levels, and it got you to the university standard of academia. I did a humanities access course where I studied psychology, sociology, and English literature. And I was passionate to learn. I was passionate to learn because I had this passion born of having a program and working this program, and that's where which really led up to the awakening. It was at college. So I was about 3.5 years sober and working a program, understanding process. As I said, it was more person-centered, Mm-hmm. And I remember I was the person when there was a lecture, if it was psychology or sociology, I was the one that kept asking the questions. I just wanted to know everything, and it kind of, people often got frustrated and thought, just write the notes down, but I really wanted to, ask questions. For instance, in sociology, there was one thing on Marxism and talking about false class consciousness. And I thought, now that sounds fascinating. What is false class consciousness? So one day when the bell went, people left, but I found myself still in the room and speaking to the tutor, speaking to Sheila, and very passionate and very, wanting to know what false class consciousness is or something like that. And this is where it happened. She looked at me and she just looked at me with her hand up and she just said to me, "You're not your thoughts or your feelings." And I wasn't asking her that question. I wasn't asking her, who am I? I wasn't trying to, that wasn't the response I wanted. But when she said that to me, something in me knew that what she was saying was true, but that thing in me that knew what she was saying is true could not express itself, and the rest of me, the mind, the body, whatever, collapsed. Just was bamboozled. Had no idea why she was saying that, but it actually shocked the system. It struck me dumb. And so without saying anything, I left the room. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left. I was in a state of shock. I went home with that seed that had just been planted. And it created a dilemma for me. I went to a meeting. And usually at a meeting, I was very good at sharing, talking about the steps, the program, this person-centered idea of Steve and working a program. Mm-hmm. And halfway through sharing, I suddenly stopped. And I was suddenly seized by self-obsession, that crippling self-obsession where, motivated by a deep sense of fear. I realized that I suddenly felt what's the other word for inauthentic? There's a lack of authenticity.
Disingenuous.
Yes, it felt very disingenuous because I realized that what Sheila had said to me, in saying that you're not your thoughts or your feelings, I realized that my whole program had been based on how I managed what I felt and what thought came out. And it was through the management of my own doership. And outside of that, I didn't know who I was. So before Sheila said that, I could say, yeah, I feel this, and I got that thought, and I'm managing it. But now I'm left in a quandary, not knowing who I was. And this kind of went back to when I was 18, when I realized my father wasn't my real father. That was a shattering of identity, and then coming into AA and then getting this good recovery, and then that being shattered, and then not knowing who I am. So that's where I was. And so
you would immediately deconstructed that personality and that character, that Steve character. Is that kind of what you're saying at that point with Sheila, your tutor or your lecturer? Is that what you're saying?
It is. It happened quite quickly, and it did happen quite quickly, because when I walked away, it was in the contemplation of that. When it dropped and when I began to inquire into that, I began to feel disingenuous, because I'd been using that. I'd been using bodily sensation and the mental emotional reaction to it, self-will over instinct, as a way to work the program. But in that process, I didn't know who I was. So everything was based on what I felt and what I thought and all of those things. And I realized that there was take that away. I don't know who I am. So, and I knew that. So one evening, it was a few days after that, I was in my apartment. It was dark. I didn't even switch the lights on. It was dark. And it got to a point where, as I say, that self-obsession came in, and it completely busted me. And I felt very dishonest. And there was just this intuition to get down. And well, actually, the thought crossed my mind first. What have I not done? I desperately searched the program. I desperately searched the 12 steps. I went to step 1, step 2, and when I got to step 3, we turn our will and our lives over to a higher power. I realized, in light of what Sheila had said, I'd realized I'd not done that. You see, I'd not handed it over. Mm-hmm. All right, and it was quite a moment to realize, after 3.5 years, to realize that you haven't actually handed over your will, you see. Mm-hmm. I was still
You've
in
done it on
command
paper.
of it.
You'd sort of done it on paper, but you hadn't experienced it.
Yeah, I'd done it on paper. It was very person-centered. It was very much doing. It was all
Sure.
the coordinate of my own identity was still very much in what I did with what I felt, what thoughts had come up. And in that person-centered reality, we become great therapists, don't we? You know, we become walking therapists, and it'd be quite annoying to other people when you start defining yourself by boundaries that reflect certain types of behavior. But that's not who you are, you see. And I think Sheila busted me on that, you know. So I realized that I hadn't done a step 3. So I thought, this is the time to do a step 3. And so I got on my knees, and in my prayer stance towards God, God, the infinite God, you know, there's no image in my life for God. God is just the infinite, you know, whatever, you know, universe, whatever it is. And I got in front of God, and I intuitively knew that I had to hand over my attachment to the mind. This was where I realized that I'd been using the mind to coordinate my life, and I, you know, looking back, that's misdirected instinct. You know, I'm directing the instinct by managing it, by trying to heal it, by trying to sort it all out, you see. So this attachment I had to the mind to maintain this identity of someone working a program, I knew that I had to let go of it and give the mind back to God. That's all I knew. That's basically what I was doing, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea what would happen, but what I did know in view of what Sheila had said, and what I intuitively come to know, was that activity that I was caught up in that attachment to the mind that maintains this activity of doership, doing the mind. I realized that the mind can only relate from memory. This is where I realized that in relation to the body mind, you cannot transcend it. Does that make sense? In relation to the body, you can't transcend the idea of you see?
Mm-hmm.
So
we're trapped in our heads, basically. We're
trapped in our heads. You're trapped in your head, and you're living in relation to your own personal experience, which is just whatever memory's coming up, providing you with what you know, you see?
Sure.
So I let go of that attachment, and I had no idea what was going to happen. But what did happen was I felt a tension, a knot in the mind when I remained as awareness. That I later came to see was entire willingness, just remaining as awareness, being completely aware of this dilemma, just this dilemma of attachment, and knowing that there's nothing you can do. Anything you do just keeps you in the attachment itself, and the attachment itself in relation to body, mind experience, personal experience, cannot transcend itself. So I just remained as awareness, and I thought, I'll just let go and let God. If I let go of that. And what I noticed when I did that, remaining as willingness, as awareness, was attention came into view, attention that was beginning to, what I call undo, was starting to dissipate. It was already starting to go through dissolution, because it's only attachment that goes through dissolution, not the mind, but the attachment to it. Mm-hmm. So where I'm entirely willing, I'm starting to feel now this knot, the attachment itself that I was identifying, that was made up of identification to the mind, was beginning to undo. It was starting to go through dissolution, and I could feel the tension starting to open like this, you see. It was quite disconcerting, because the experience itself feels like you are losing your mind, you know, your mental, it feels like you're losing your mental position on reality, or your mental paradigm on you. and it feels like you're going to lose your mind. And it was quite, as I said, disconcerting. So there was a choiceless choice in that moment to either stop and go and be, and through fear, stop that from happening and react and stay in that mental position, or to trust God and remain as entire willingness and allow the continual dissolution of this attachment that you've maintained all your life, that's kept you in a place of what you know. And what I did instead was remain in the unknowing awareness of seeing this happen. And I consented as awareness to remain as awareness, to remain entirely willing. And the tension just completely opened up. And there was a sense of losing the mental identity that as I say, attachment is identity, is the subject idea of ourselves in the mind, and that just went through dissolution. In the absence of this dissolution, this tension was the first seeing of reality I ever got, the first seeing of the call it mental awakening. I don't know what you call it, mind awakening. But what in the absence of that tension, the mind, the mind itself, in the absence of such attachment, opened up, and it reflected awareness. It reflected a pure observation. Okay. It's a very, very pure observation. There was no other thoughts, just mind just then came into the mind opened up to truly associate to this witness. That's the only way I can describe it. There was this true association between mind and what was knowing. And in that moment, the knowing of the mind being known, then reflected this knowing. So there was the knowing of the mind, and the mind became self-evident of what was knowing. It became one. So consciousness and this, what we call mind, simply became one. And in that moment, I came to understand peace of mind, which I'd never had before. I'd never ever experienced or come to know such peace, such tranquility. And also, I must say, I'd never seen the mind in its true function. Does that make sense? Because where I'd attached to the mind, I'd turned the mind into a subjective objective relationship. You know, before this awakening, my mind always felt as if it was having a discussion with itself. It always felt, you know, my mind was always constantly thinking itself. Now that's the illusion of attachment. That's the illusion of self-obsession. Okay. But in the dissolution of such attachment and tension, the mind was corrected to its true association, and its true association was this perfect witness. And I felt peace of mind. And like I said, you know, it was the first time I'd ever seen this. And I had no idea this was going to happen, of course. So that was the beginning. Okay, so in that wonderment, in this sense of liberation, this awakening to consciousness being the experience of the mind, and the mind in its true reflection of consciousness, suddenly there was a pull. There was a pull, and I felt as consciousness, because there was nothing keeping me in the head anymore, nothing keeping me in the mind attached. Consciousness then was being pulled deeper into my body. And it was pulling me into the heart chakra, into the heart area, the emotional area. And suddenly this heart center began to go through dissolution also. Okay. The attachment I had to my emotional nature, the emotional identity of Steve began to also go through dissolution. It began to spin and it began to open. And as it was beginning to open, I was shown many emotional attachments. They were like memories coming up as it was opening, memories coming up, and with each memory, emotional memory, because emotion is memory, I do believe, and it's more to do with the mind than it is to do with real feeling. But I was shown these things, because the emotional identity is more powerful than the mental position of identity. So suddenly this emotional contraction begins to open, and it felt more disconcerting, even more disconcerting. It took more faith, it took more willingness to remain as awareness, to allow this tension to go through, to allow its own dissolution. So it would show me things, my identity as being English, being a man, whatever it was that made up identity was falling away. And the last one that I was shown was Christ. Jesus was shown to me. And in this last vision I got, memory I got, was I had to consent to letting go of Jesus, and I realized in that moment what I was letting go of was of course it was the emotional attachment I'd created to the narrative that I'd developed in my head of Jesus. So I let that go as well, and there was an astonishing sense of fear, and then as the heart opened up, and then there was, I'll just tell you this. I mean, it's just a
go for it, mate. This is wonderful.
I know, but it just sounds so dramatic and it sounds ridiculous. But this is what happened, and as the heart opened, and all vestiges of emotional identity then fell away. There appeared to be then an abyss, a black abyss. Okay. And looking back, I now come to believe that this is the attachment we have to the body. There are three knots: the mind, the heart, and the body, you see. And then I felt, as awareness, as consciousness, I was then being pulled into this very dark abyss. And the last remnant of fear came up, and it said, you'll either go mad or you'll die. And I said, okay. The entire willingness was consciousness being okay with that. And if I will die, I will die. If I go mad, I go mad. But so be it. There's nothing to go back to. So I allowed myself to die in this abyss. I was completely pulled into this abyss. And for a nanosecond, I entered into complete non-existence. I fell into the absolute nature, which one cannot describe. It's just absolute. There was a falling into it where there was a falling, there was no dissolution of this knowing of God. There was no dissolution at all, but there was a complete merging with God. And falling into God was suddenly in coming to, suddenly I came to, I was back in the body. And I realized that knowing that fell through the self, that fell into God, came to know that it is of God and is God, you see. And in coming to, that awareness, that knowing was completely awakened, and it was completely non-local, and it related from not here. That's the only way you can describe it. It's not here. It's relating from the fourth or fifth dimension, as Bill says. I was rocketed into the fourth dimension. So upon this awakening, I could see that there's only God, you see. All I say is only God. I am, and the nature of my I am is transcendent of the body mind, but in its innermost is God, you see. And so that evening, before going to bed, because this happened in the evening, before going to bed, I felt completely liberated, completely alive. And I'd never known such, I just never known such truth, what I'd been shown and what I'd awakened to, what the awakening itself. So before going to bed, I remembered a thought crossing my mind, thinking, will this still be here in the morning? Because I hope so. God, I hope so. Because prior to that, I'd had sort of awakenings in the prior 3.5 years of working the program. And I'd had sort of awakenings, like a heart awakening. There was a time before the vital spiritual experience, there was a time before that where I had a heart awakening. And the heart awakening was where I saw that the heart emotions, the real motion of the heart responds to things without you even having to think. And that was a real awakening for me, you know. But wow. But there were other things that you awaken to. And then it kind of just becomes part of your life and you lose it, don't you? You just become desensitized, or you get used to it. And it's not wonderful anymore. But this time, on this night, I didn't want it to go. I get emotional talking about it. I didn't want this to go. This was the most incredible liberation, and to see God and to see what you are in God and of God, and to see how the body mind in its true association is known, and the knowing itself is in God. You see, I was shown this. You see, I was shown this through being entirely willing, just simply through being entirely willing.
I was going to ask you about that. The impetus to detach yourself from the mind, was that based, that willingness you said, was that driven by an anger? Was it driven by a futility? What drove that desire? And what was there a prayer associated? What was the drive to do that? What led it? Because it seems like that's I guess that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yes. What is that? What do we do to achieve that? For a lot of people here who are agnostic and atheist as well, they'd be intrigued to know what drove that for you.
What drove that for me was going back to that sense of dishonesty, knowing that I'd willfully attached to the mind and had all coordinates of sense self in relation to the program and working the program on patterning and the mind. I saw the dishonesty of it. That's really what I saw, the dishonesty of it. That was the impetus. When I remained entirely willing, it was like a surrender. It was like how can I see this bullshit? Mm-hmm. I realized that I'd not handed it over, you know, that I was using it. So I thought, but that is what I know. And the only thing that knew this, the entire willingness, is unknowing. This is the paradox, isn't it? There's something in us that is unknowing. You know, what actually knows what we're thinking is in fact unknowing. You see, but when we get caught up in a thinking, then we become someone who knows, and we can get lost in relative knowledge, and that can compromise our absolute knowledge. You see, so really, I just saw it was this dishonesty, this attachment to the mind was a willful deviation from what could be willing. And what I found to be willing was just awareness. And just by accepting it as awareness without doing it for anyone, and I think this was the key, I did it for no one. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I just remained willing, and I was aware of this dilemma. All I was aware of was this dilemma of attachment. And I became willing. I handed it back to God and remained willing. And I didn't do it for me. There was no sense of needing anything. I was done. I'd lived my life dishonestly, not just dishonestly. I'm a bit hard on myself. I'll be honest with you. I was a bit hard on myself back then. But I'd just been sober 3.5 years. And even after 3.5 years, here I am, incredibly dishonest. My God, what a crime this self-obsession is, this ego, whatever. So it was just remaining as awareness for no one.
Fantastic. Hey, that's just amazing. So we need to move on because that's been absorbing. We're already sort of 45 minutes into the podcast, into the session. So if there's any questions, can you please put them in chat and send them to Mike Stacey there or to Ian G. And ask. But I've got a few more questions. But you did sort of touch on this one, and this is the biggie, I guess, is because you spoke about losing that concept of Christ consciousness. So I guess you could be talking about Krishna or Buddha or anyone of that mind. You talk about that Christ mind is what is God, and what the hell are we doing here? What's the point?
No point. You don't know.
Okay.
You can't ever know. I think if there is a purpose, it's to know who you are. It's to know what you are, not even who you are, but what you are. And once you come to know what you are, then you come to see that everything is that. Everything is that. There doesn't have to be. For instance, we have creation, don't we? And you look at creation, and it's beautiful. It's incredible, and sometimes it can be very ugly. But that is creation. But within this creation, we can get lost in a dream. We can get caught up in our own perception of it and not see it from what we are, not allowing things to be really seen and not to see it,
So are you talking about labeling things and giving things names and giving them identity as opposed to the concepts? So that's the dream. Because this is a big thing in non-dual circles, which I have an issue with, is they talk about the life, this being a dream, and we're living in a dream. And I kind of bridle at that sometimes because that just doesn't make sense to me. We start talking about quantum physics and stuff, and that's just I don't know where to start with that stuff. So because I'm not a scientist, but explain to me this dream concept, because I've heard this so many times, and I just like to get your take on that.
Yeah, sure. I after the awakening, I because of the truth that I was given to see, for instance, through falling through the 3 knots, through the whole fabric of person-centered or mind, body, mind. I came to see that creation, I don't even know why creation is here, why we are actually here, apart from coming to see what we are in it and seeing how everything in it is God. Or reality or absolute. We don't have to trip over words, but ultimate reality, The dream, when I did start to publicly talk about consciousness, because it wasn't in AA that I spoke about it. I spoke about it outside of AA, and
I'm sure you did.
yeah, I did, yeah. And I ended up on the non-dual scene and all of that. And there was a lot of, especially Neo-Advaita, they've really got it in a way that's this is a dream and it's not real, and there's only this consciousness. And I know for me that's not the truth. The dream is in the attachment to this creation. That's what we call willfulness. That's what we call self-obsession. That's what creates the self-obsession in the first place, that only a vital spiritual experience can cure you from. But creation itself is a wonderful thing. Even Bill says God gave us instincts for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Not to dream, not to see that it's all a dream. If you take the deepest meaning of the body mind, if you take the deepest meaning of our instincts, that in itself is a church. That in itself is community. All of these instincts we have are designed for humanity. Without them, we wouldn't come together, But the thing is, what is it that communes within it? What is it that communes within community? What is communion? And it's creation is our body is community, and what communes in it doesn't see community as other than what is experiencing it as consciousness, as gnosis. There's no dream. It's just creation, beauty, appearance, whatever. But as soon as you attach to it, as soon as you attach to the mind and you contract into a subjective sense of self, objectifying everything you see by the thought of it, then you'll get blinded by the thought of it or the word of it. You're not living from reality.
So I guess the mind is a genetic mistake in the grand scheme of things, and it's a rarity, because dogs and cats and squirrels and birds and pelicans and don't have that mind.
No, they do. They do have mind, but they're not self-conscious. Okay. We are self-conscious, but the thing with self-consciousness, we can get caught up in the image. We can get caught up in the reflection, which is what we call narcissus.
Okay.
So, and that's the dream. That's living by the dream. The I thought is the dream maker. Self-obsession is the dream. It's
okay.
But the world itself is not a dream, or if it is a dream, it's God's dream. And in our very essence, what we are, where we are of God, it's a mystery why this is here. But my sense of the dream is illusion. Illusion is what creates the dream.
Okay.
Reality, you can undo that. If this is God's dream, you don't have to be dreaming in it. But that's what seems to be happening with what was happening with me prior to the awakening. I was dreaming my way through God's dream, but now I'm awake to God, and if it's God's dream, then it's a beautiful dream. But I'm awake to see it.
What about the question I just asked you then? There's no questions coming through at the moment, but what about the question I asked you with regards to the word God? And I know you sort of said you're trying to lose that concept, or you lost that concept. Is there a creative intelligence? Is there a divine intelligence that guides us? And
no.
No? Okay.
No, it doesn't. I don't think it guides us. I think we're alone. I think that awareness that is in God and of God is alone. It's all one. And when it knows its source, when conscious contact associates to its inner resource, it doesn't go into the body. It goes into its natural state, which is complete non-locality. And from that essence, from that source, there is a potential for anything. You start to see how that itself is the building block of our thinking. Thinking still remains after awakening, but the thinker goes away. That's the attachment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So you've got to go and you've got to make your toast in the morning and go and buy a bottle of milk, and you've got to go to work. So thinking still remains. So you don't become a robot. It's you.
No.
The thoughts are still there. Yeah.
Yeah. The thought's still there. You need thoughts. Even in the step 11, we review our day. Every morning you sort your thoughts out for the day, don't you? Right. Mm-hmm. But it's not the thoughts per se. It's the thinker of the thoughts. That's the illusion. That's the I. When the I falls away, suddenly you have your thoughts, and you can manage your thoughts from a conscious contact place, which is step 11.
Okay.
It's the thinker. People don't realize that self-obsession is just a small thought that believes it's experiencing your thoughts that are naturally arising. You believe that your mind is talking to itself, or you're having, that's the illusion, that's the dream, that's the identity. But no, thoughts are wonderful things, creating thoughts. Everyone loves thoughts. Even people that deny them will still love the thought of denying them. It's power. Mind is a power that we're given to create. We're given instincts to create communities about humanity, and we need thoughts to for this part. But after a while, you just come to see that the vital reality is conscious contact. The vital reality in anything is the knowing of anything. And that knowing of anything allows what it's knowing to come into true association to what is knowing. You know, the oneness continues, the oneness community, all of that continues. I'm not Advaita.
Okay.
I've read a lot of Advaita, and I do like the traditional Advaita, but not the Neo.
I think it's a conversation for another day. The thing with I really like what you said about Neo Advaita and traditional Advaita and stuff, because that's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down.
Yeah, sure.
And there's still the question, and I don't want to get to, because there's some questions coming from the audience. Maitreya Picard has a question for you. Maitreya asks, once you are non-dual awareness, do you still experience such things as frustration or disappointment?
Yeah, you do. And you know what the magical thing is about that is what you perceive as frustration, right? Which is a natural, when an instinct is blocked, your instinct will offer you that frustration to go beyond that block, to create, right? But what you begin to, when you start to practice conscious contact more, your step 11, when you start to really deepen in your inquiry into what awareness is, you'll come to see whatever you're frustrated with doesn't exist separately from the knowing of it. And the knowing of it is always okay. Just allow that frustration to come in true association to what is okay, and it begins to change. It begins to soften. You know, attachments to misusing frustration fall away, and you can use frustration in a positive way. What's wrong with frustration? Has anyone not been frustrated in the last week? It's a natural energy. It's a natural. But you've got to give the experience of frustration back to your knowing. The knowing must always remain the experience. This is conscious contact. This is step 11. Mm-hmm. So whatever you feel, whatever's going through, whatever thought is arising, allow the experience of it to be consciousness or conscious contact. This is the art of step 11. This is the art of deep 12-step inquiry. Yeah.
So give that frustration to your awareness, that consciousness.
Yeah. This is entirely willing to have the defect removed, because what a character defect is where the mind is still in the habit of whatever thought you have or feeling you have, where it associates to your instinct. We call that self-centeredness. We call that self-obsession, right? Self-will over instinct. That's step 1, by the way. All right. Do you know that? And that's what we look into. Then we go into step 4 and we look at the 3rd and 4th column, right? The 3rd column is instinct. The 4th column is self-obsession in its possession of that instinct. So, but what is it that discriminates these two things? It's awareness, it's knowing, it's consciousness. So one begins to allow the mind in its reaction to instinct to slowly come in true association to what is knowing. Then the correct usage of the will, or the right size of the mind, begins to occur. So knowing must always come first. Conscious contact must always come first. And if it doesn't, then then that character defect needs to be seen. One has to discriminate. One has to take inventory or inquiry. It's how it is.
Thank you very much. So we're kind of well into the final straight now. So we've got a few questions there. So just bear with us, Steve. We can. So Laurie asks, which is a nice little segue. And just quickly, Laurie asks, can Steve talk about step 6 and 7 in his view, in your view?
Yeah, sure. Very briefly. Step 6 and 7 is once you've come to see in step 1 that the problem is self-will over instinct, self-possession. You come to see that in step 2, it's only awareness that can transcend that dynamic itself. And then as awareness, come to agree to give the experience back to awareness, begin to discriminate in step 4 between the 3rd and 4th column. What happens then is by 6 and 7, you've come to see how awareness itself, or conscious contact, is the active principle in recovery, nothing else. And when you can remain as knowing, step 6, which is willingness, entire willingness, you can relate to innermost of awareness. If you can't relate to innermost awareness, if you can't remain as aware and relate to the non-local innermost of awareness, what you'll do is you'll be trapped being aware of your thoughts and feelings, and you'll keep going into the body, and it still remains a bit self-centered. It still remains a bit person-centered. But the absolute meaning of 6 and 7 is awareness in relation to its innermost. The innermost is step 7. That's the innermost resource. Okay.
So it's basically a big dustbin you can put all your shit into, right? Awareness.
Well,
I'm being flippant.
Okay. Yeah, because it's an idea. The dustbin's an idea, right? But if you can remain as awareness in relation to innermost, what you look at as a character defect, by not identifying with the character defect, you're allowing for the solution to act upon that character defect, where the character defect then goes through dissolution. It's only the dissolution that maintains attachment and identity. Once that it goes through dissolution, then that part of the mind opens up and it corrects itself by reflecting the knowing. Then your mind will start to reflect the higher value of what you know, rather than getting caught up in your instinct as a preferred method of reality. You know, the mind with self-obsession, we're in the character defect, we're looking for the mind to come inward to the higher value, and then as consciousness be the experience of the mind, and as consciousness be the experience of instinct, everything starts to associate. I'm saying all of this quickly now because we're coming to an end.
I really appreciate your patience with it. Thank you very much. Neil from Burlington is a regular here. Just asked this question: would you agree with the following statement? As we grow older in life, we move from the illusion of certainty to the certainty of illusion.
Yeah. As you get older, you relax. Notice that with myself. You naturally begin to relax, and also don't forget the what you might notice is with the corporations that try and sell us things or try and influence us in how to get our needs met, you know, and how to identify the images that go with that. That's how they mind control you. You start to see as you get older, they stop aiming it at you, you know, and then you start to see how one has been caught up in the illusion of advertisement, you know, how the instinct has been led astray by influence, and how we've adopted certain images to go into that. But as you get older, you start to naturally come away from a lot of that. You just become a bit wiser, you know.
Okay.
Just relax more.
Okay, so we've got Scott here. Asks, are you referencing the 4 agreements from the Toltec people? If so, I love the agreements.
I've never heard of that before, so sorry.
Sounds fascinating, though. I'm sure there's a lot of people. I can see Donald nodding his head there, so he'll probably be able to riff out on that later on. But thanks.
Yeah. But truth is absolute. So it's truth in everything, you know.
Peggy asks, how do you practice non-attachment on a daily basis? Good question, Peggy.
Yeah, it's a good question. The best way is to practice observation in the morning. Do 20 minutes of pure observation. Come away from things like active meditation. Just sit quietly and just observe whatever's coming into your mind, whatever's coming into your body sensation. What you're looking for is the mental and emotional reaction to body sensation. When, as awareness, you can start discriminating between these two things, which is basically ongoing step 4, okay, inventory. You can start establishing yourself more as awareness being the experience of that, rather than getting caught up in this dynamic of mental, emotional will over instinct. If you can remain as awareness, you are in fact practicing non-attachment, and you're practicing non-attachment for no one. If you're practicing non-attachment to get something, then you're not practicing non-attachment. You're doing it for yourself. Don't do any of this for yourself. Abandon yourself immediately. Remain as awareness. Come to see this dynamic that we're told in step 1, you know, which is self-will over instinct. You know, because self-will over instinct, I mean, we look at the abnormal reaction to alcohol, but that's only a small part. As soon as we put the alcohol down, we're looking at an abnormal reaction to our self-instinct. And we're shown this in step 4. So So to practice what I call discrimination is also the same as practicing non-attachment. Start as awareness, see this dynamic and start seeing it as a pattern. What I often tell people is, in the beginning, practicing this non-attachment, it can feel quite counterintuitive, because the part of your mind that is mental and emotional, reacting to bodily sensation or instinct, does feel real, doesn't it? It feels like it's you, doesn't it? But it's not you. Awareness, when you begin to identify yourself as awareness, then you begin to non-attach, and when you begin to see this dynamic, and then after that you start coming to see how consciousness itself is the experience, that nothing exists separately, but that's further along. So remain as awareness.
Okay, this is actually a really good question, and I think it's a legitimate question. Just somebody from the audience who remains nameless says, just wondering if you did many hallucinogens when you were out in the madness.
I didn't know. I took no drugs. I tried pot once or twice. It doesn't agree with alcohol. It doesn't agree with alcohol. Okay. I smoked a joint once, and I was drinking, and then I went to stand up and I couldn't stand up. It just didn't agree with drinking. So I got rid of that, because I love drinking. Drinking was my thing, So I didn't take any hallucinogens, but I can understand why you asked that question.
I'm going to just, and one of the questions that I ask a lot of our guests here is it possible, and just saying, is it possible that we live in a cold, dead universe made of cold, dead matter, and that consciousness and awareness is just merely a trick of evolution to give these tiny, fleeting lives some essence of existence or some meaning? Is it possible that all of this is just a very, it's a faint flicker of a candle, that we're given this consciousness just so we kind of enjoy the time that we've got, and there's nothing else?
When I died to self and fell into the absolute, I came to see that the absolute, the power of the absolute, in a second can create a universe. Now, that's what it felt like. It was so awesome, this power. And it made the universe seem insignificant compared to this power, you see. So for me, the question is not that at all. The question is, come to see that everything is self-evident of what is knowing. And the reality of that knowing is what can take you back to God. You can't do it via any attachment. So to me, it doesn't matter what's here, why there's consciousness. All I know is there is consciousness, and its true origin is God. It's not the body mind. That's all I know.
I mean, certainly true. There's consciousness because we're conscious of being alive, and I'm certainly conscious that I'm aware and I'm here. But as to I have no other experience outside of that. Do you know what I mean? And that's
but there is no experience. Look, the only experience there is knowing.
Okay.
What is outside of that? We can kid ourselves and attach to the mind, subjectify an idea of ourselves, and give the illusion of us thinking our thoughts, get caught up in self-obsession, and then start seeking what it is we are. When what we are is the knowing. It was there all along. There is only knowing. Whatever you look at, whatever you see, there is only consciousness. That's all there is.
Okay. Great answer. That's wonderful.
Sorry, I can't.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. So listen, I think we've just about come to the end. One more question. I think you've seen some of the interviews we've done previously. You know what question's coming. Just to say to everyone, I just wanted to let you know that we have a Facebook page, Here's Tom with the Weather, where you can come and join and hear about all the stuff that's going on and all the kooky philosophical questions that we ask, and some of the stuff, the guests that we've got coming up. So go to Facebook page, Here's Tom with the Weather. We also are just looking for some contributions for the Zoom, to keep the Zoom and the podcast open. So if you've got PayPal, send it to gilwriter@hotmail.co.uk. That's Gilwriter, WRITER at hotmail.co.uk. Just a few spondoolies or a few potatoes or whatever it is that you, wherever part of the world you call it, dollars, pounds, pence, shekels, whatever, just whack them in our account. That'd be great. We'll take 3 figures or 4 figures if you've got that much, absolutely. But yeah, that's fine. Final question. And just to say that Steve's details are in chat. He has a website, and his book is fantastic. It's so go there. So yeah, and book sales are going well, you say, Steve? Yeah. What's the name of your book? Tell us a little bit about your book.
Oh, the book is called Walking Awake, and I think I wrote it in 2000. I think it was published in 2015, possibly 2014. So it's been out a while. Did very well in London in that Watkins bookshop.
Yeah, that's some great reviews. So yeah, I'm checking it out. So yeah, and there's a website there. So we'll put all the details in chat. So here's the final question, mate. So book sales have just gone through the roof, actually. So because of this podcast, you've sold 1 million copies, and the universe has been very kind. Yeah, that's it. And book sales have been fantastic, and you've made your fortune. Fantastic. So you get the family, you get all your friends, you chuck them, you buy a super yacht, which has got 3 levels. You've got 2 spas, a cinema. You've got all the modern cons, and you set sail from Dover. And you set from the White Cliffs, and you just you head out down the Atlantic, round the Cape of Good Horn, and you're up into the Pacific. And then somewhere off Fiji, you strike a submerged coral reef. And it's like all hands on deck, everyone off. And it starts to sink very rapidly. And all you've got time is to get your friends and family overboard, and they start paddling away through the shark-infested waters to a desert island. And you're still on deck, the last man standing. You run down to your library. And there's no big book, and there's no walking away, by the way. So there's none of your books there. All you've got time is to get your favorite book and a plastic bag, chuck the book in the bag, dive overboard and through those shark-infested waters, and sit there for a few weeks reading that one book and regaling all your friends with the stories in that book. What's the book? Who's it by, and why?
It would be called The Paradox of Instruction.
Whoa.
By Darfree John.
Okay. So let's just give us that again. The Paradox of Instruction.
Yeah. By Darfree John. It's not in print anymore, but you can possibly find an old copy. It's just a remarkable book. It's the book that can poison your mind. It changes you forever.
And how do you spell the chap's the author's name?
Oh, it's D-A as in Dar.
Yep.
Free John, John, Darfree John, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
He's quite a controversial figure because he ended up creating a cult, and there's all sorts of things. But I don't care about the personality stuff. I just read the book, and it's just incredible.
And what was it about the book, mate? What did it for you?
It's like anything. It's when the awakening occurred for me, I had to learn. The world turned upside down, and living as consciousness is not the same as living as a concept anymore. It's not person-centered. It's just everything's just happening, and there's the experience being consciousness. So I had to kind of look in a lot of Indian literature. I had to look at Advaita and Gitas and stuff like that. And there I learned the structure of consciousness that I could then, that made me understand what happened, and made me understand the program better. He was one of the people that I came across. It was through Nathan Gill, in fact, when Nathan Gill, quite a good known teacher, non-duality teacher before he died, he was helping me with Walking Away. And he said to me one day, he said, "Have you ever read The Knee of Listening by Darfree John?" I said, "No." So when the book was over, I read The Knee of Listening, and it's just an incredible book. This guy is just sharp as a tack, and then reading some of his other books, I found that The Paradox of Instruction was the best thing. Such a really, really good book, because in the West, we don't have language for consciousness. We just don't have but in India, and he did a lot of work in India, and he just understood it. So yeah, there we are. That's my offering to you.
Fantastic. Love it. Love a good book. We all love that's why one of the rich parts of this show is to find a good book that we've not heard of, and I've not heard of that one, certainly. So listen, I just want to say thank you very, very much for coming along. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now, after we stop recording, if you wouldn't mind hanging around, because I know that we've got a room full of people here who'd love to ask you a few questions, as they usually do. So they hang around and they grill you pretty better than I did, that's for sure. So I want to thank you very much. We'll be back this time next week with another guest. I'm not entirely sure who it is. Mike, who we got next week? You don't know, do you?
No, I don't.
We're going to be back, and we'll put it all out on the Facebook page. Don't forget that Facebook page. Here's Tom with the weather. We'll see you next week. And
Mystery.
Sorry?
Mystery guest.
Yes, that's it. Lucky dip. All right. Thanks very much, everyone.